Okay. Well, welcome to Question Authority, the podcast that will attempt to question mainstream narratives and a whole bunch of other stuff. As you can probably tell, very new to this. So I've been doing some research on neoconservatism. So let's see if we can just pull up the definition. Neoconservatism is a political movement born in the United States during the 1960s among liberal hawks who became disenchanted with the increasingly pacifist foreign policy of the Democratic Party and with the growing new left and counterculture of the 1960s, particularly the Vietnam protests. So, in the 1960s, we have the rise of the civil rights movement. We have this war in Vietnam. It's much like every single war that we have started, every engagement that we've been in since the end of World War II. You know what's something really interesting to try and find out, and I wanted to do this before I started, but let's see. Declarations of war. War since World War II. So it looks like there's no official declaration of war since World War II. Let's go to this. Did the U.S. declare war on Vietnam? No. No formal declaration of war was ever made, which was, according to many, a violation of the U.S. Constitution. So since World War II, unless I'm missing something, we've never actually officially declared war. So what is all of this sending U.S. troops to other countries? What is all of these? What are all of these bombs that we're dropping on other countries? There's no declaration of war. So do we have a right to go into these countries? So in the 1960s, you have a movement that springs up people who are pacifist or anti-war. We don't see our place in the world as going over to other countries to impose our will on them, and see our military as only a necessity to defend our country against real threats. There's a lot of people that didn't like that very much, and one of them was Bill Kristol's father. So what does Bill Kristol's father have to say about all this hippie nonsense?
So that was the 1960s and the early 1970s. We believed we were living in something called an age of affluence, if not an age of Aquarius. That is, the only problem left was the distribution of wealth, not the creation of wealth. And the only problem in foreign affairs was goodwill rather than wicked will. And we have learned that this is not the way the world is, not the way the world works. And I think the American people have learned it. I'm not sure that All the politicians have yet learned it, but many show signs of being on a learning.
What the hell is this guy talking about? Shouldn't we all strive for peace? Shouldn't we look at the problems in our own country as the distribution of wealth, dealing with the issues that we face for our own people? Who is this smug character sitting there in a suit telling us that all of this hippie nonsense about peace, it's not really how the world works? Now, you'd have to be naive to think that the world is a peaceful place. The world is not a peaceful place. But after World War II, we brought our troops home, and there were some people who thought that they needed to keep this war machine moving and turning. Not to get distracted onto a rabbit hole or another point, but we see what happened in Afghanistan. 20 years. Over $300 million spent each day. Let me say that again. Over $300 million spent each day to accomplish what? Maybe somebody can answer that question for me, but what did we accomplish? Beyond catching Osama bin Laden, who was someone that we propped up in the past and then turned against us like so many people do. We raise up these terrorist groups. We fund them. We give them arms to fight in our dirty wars. And then they turn back around on us, or they don't do what we're asking them to do. And they create instability in the countries, but we prop them up and give them weapons and arms. So what is the point of all of this? We have these neoconservatives with an agenda to go and spread American democracy across the world. And I think everybody needs to start calling bullshit. It's not that complicated. I didn't go to college and learn theory. I'm just a normal person looking at this shit. And I live in this country, so I guess I have a voice that I can use. And I think it's up to all of us, just like they did in the 1960s, to protest all of these engagements overseas that are illegal. We didn't declare war anywhere after World War II, but we're sending troops overseas. We're bombing overseas. What is the justification for this? Yes, 9/11 happened. Yes, people were killed. Yes, we went after those responsible. And we caught them, but we stayed there in that country. So there actually was, and still is, I'm sure, a plan to keep these foreign engagements going. And neoconservatism has a lot to do with it. So let's try to get back to the roots. I'll get into Bill Kristol in a minute. Don't try to rehabilitate these monsters. George Bush is a war criminal. Dick Cheney is a war criminal. They conspired to commit murder using United States forces in other countries. Just because George Bush goes to a sporting event with Ellen does not mean that he is a good person. Maybe he was a useful idiot in all of this. I don't think anybody gets to the position of presidency without a little bit of intelligence. He knew what he was doing. But let's look back. Let's go back to the people that reacted to a movement for peace in the world. And believe me, That scared the hell out of the establishment. Mass protests in the streets. African Americans get their rights. Leaders spring up. Populations are energized. And we all start to get to the point where we see that collectively, as a whole, we have greater power than those at the top. They don't want that. And they've done so much to stamp out even the last burning embers of anything like a peaceful anti-war movement or movements that mobilize to try to get the population to voice what they want from their leaders and the direction that they want to go in their country. Now, we are out, sort of Afghanistan. That should be applauded. But let's go back to Bill Kristol's dad, the father of neoconservatism, a movement that is a reaction to pacifism. It is quite literally defined as a movement for more unnecessary war. And Bill Kristol's dad is going to reveal himself. Oh.
Okay. Well, let's stay on this issue. Do you feel that, for instance, the crisis of the hostages in Iran and the closing hours of the 70s inspired a renewal of conviction, values, and direction in the American people? Yes or no, McAvoy?
It seems that was a resiliency economy. Bringing these is self-image.
Not the world we were going to live in the past yet.
The third one, and we've discovered that they're because in a friendly, fraternal tone of voice. 80s, I think, with a
What are the most significant lessons of the 1970s, and what is the most pressing public policy problem for the new decade?
Let me answer.
Okay. Let me go back. So, this guy, Irving Kristol. So at some point during this conversation, he quotes, well, it doesn't exactly quote, but he references William Shakespeare. And that reference to William Shakespeare, let's see. Okay. I got it. Okay. So he refers to this old adage for the uses of adversity. And there's a William Shakespeare quote that says, "Sweet are the uses of adversity, which, like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head." So essentially what this is saying is that there are uses for adversity. So in our lives, if everything is good and peaceful and everything is fine, then we tend not to grow as people who are not sharpened by these challenges and things that we face. But who in their right mind, other than some privileged elitist like Bill Kristol, is worth over $10 million, who never served in a war, who never fought, who never trained in the military, but is so comfortable telling other people to go over there and do it, and trying to come up with innumerable justifications for war, but comfortably sitting in his own home. So a person like me, who had to work for a living at a very young age, still work for a living. So I have had to go through the challenges of, let's say, eviction, the challenges of not making enough money to pay my bills, working paycheck to paycheck, trying to find health insurance, going to the doctor without health insurance, having to go to the hospital without health insurance, dealing with the bills that come from not having health insurance. Now, whatever uptight asshole might try to say, like, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that. And right now, I have a job that I can live comfortably. And that came from a lot of hard work and a lot of mistakes and a lot of learning from those mistakes. So this quote from William Shakespeare, I'll just read it again. It's sweet are the uses of adversity, which, like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head. So it is true that difficulties in our lives do help us grow as human beings. But this neoconservative agenda, what they're trying to do is they're trying to twist that and say, well, after World War II ended, the United States, as if it was a teenager or a growing child, as a whole, needs to have adversity in order to grow. So they ignore the real challenges of real life people, normal people who have plenty of adversity in their lives without the US government starting a war somewhere else. And it can only be from this privileged mindset. This idea can only spring up from that because they have everything that they could possibly need. They don't have to work for a living. Bill Kristol doesn't have to work. He just has to talk and spread his garbage propaganda wherever he can. And he makes millions of dollars. These people don't have to suffer. These people don't, they focus all of this attention on war, $300 million a day in Afghanistan. And then they turn around and they tell someone like Bernie Sanders, who ran for president on a populist platform to help people improve their lives, to take the money that we pay in taxes, to use the Federal Reserve, the money that we all pay into, the money of our country, and take it and use it to fix a broken insurance system. And they say, oh, how can you pay for it? How are you going to pay for that? We don't have the money. We don't have the money. But anytime that they need money for war, they are willing to spend $300 million a day in Afghanistan. And then we see now that they left after 20 years that there is nothing that they can show for it. They went after Osama bin Laden. They caught him fairly quickly. Why do we need to stay there? They don't want us there. It's very obvious they don't want us there. Just like with Saddam Hussein. So Saddam Hussein was a terrible person, but in all reality, there's very little connection, if any, for the 9/11 attacks to Iraq at all. Saddam is a terrible leader, but where else in the world can you find terrible leaders? I don't know if it's necessary for me to do it right now, but anyone can go on Google and just start typing in dictator or where are murderous dictators in the world? Where are there military regimes? Where are there tragedies occurring? Where are there bad governments? We're not in a position, and we never were, and we never were supposed to be in a position where we're going to go and fix all the problems in the world. But we only go to the places where they have a strategic interest. There are oil fields in Iraq. There are oil fields in Afghanistan. There are mineral deposits in Afghanistan. There are poppy fields in Afghanistan. So you see where the war on terror and the war on drugs start to merge together. And we already know the CIA was involved in running drugs into this country. So we have these massive expenditures of both monetary and human capital to fight wars that can never be won and essentially rob us of what we should have as American citizens. We should have a say and we should have access to all of these resources that are being wasted. How much good could have been done over the last 20 years with that $300 million a day that we spent in Afghanistan for nothing? Just think about it. So let's just close this cocksucker out. And let's go to the sun, like father, like son. So this guy interviews Bill Kristol, and this is the most recent thing that I could find. And the way that it starts off, well, it's very painful to watch. But let's just hear what this guy, Matt Lewis, what he says here is very, very, very telling. So let's go, Matt Lewis. Let's hear what you have to say.
And my take was, look, I don't want to relitigate the last 20 years, but
how many people are saying that, I wonder? oh, I don't want to relitigate the last 20 years. Yeah, we spent all this money, wasted all this money. We displaced so many people. We caused untold tragedy in other countries, but we were trying to do good. But didn't work out. Blah 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 blah. I don't want to relitigate all of those things, but what I want to do is instead talk about how we left.
But what was the status of 9 months ago? And it seemed to me that things were okay. We had
Things were okay. Look, things were okay. We're wasting $300 million a day occupying a country that we have no business being in. Things were fine. Why would we ever leave?
had an attack in America, and we weren't suffering a lot of casualties of American casualties in Afghanistan. And so
we weren't suffering a lot of casualties. Oh, I mean, not American casualties. All this bullshit about us going over there to help people is complete fucking nonsense. Do you hear this guy? We didn't suffer a whole lot of casualties. I mean, not American casualties, because that's all he fucking cares about. We're not over there on a humanitarian mission. Just like the police are trained that your job is to get home safe at night to your family. What happened to protect and serve? Isn't that the police's motto? Isn't that what they're supposed to be doing? Protecting a community and serving that community? They sign up for what they know is a dangerous job, and they try and make it look like they're there to help communities. And yes, there are good cops and there are bad cops, but as a whole, the system is corrupt. Just like as a whole, the military-industrial complex is corrupt, and their objectives are hidden. Their objectives are obscured. We didn't have a lot of casualties. Oh, but no, not American casualties. None of us died. We're over there for us. Trump slipped up and said it. He said we're there to protect the fucking oil fields in Syria, which is another conflict that we're in. Yeah. Anyways.
I was perfectly comfortable with the status quo. David argued, and he may know more about this than I do, David argued that that was untenable, that we were losing, and that the status quo we couldn't be preserved. And I noticed that Ross Douthat has tweeted, he says that the tactical disaster vindicated the strategic decision and proved our light footprint did not offer a sustainable path. Do you buy that? Could we have basically just kept things going and say like in South Korea?
These people are monsters. They have beliefs that they hold very, very strongly, and these beliefs corrupt the way that they see the world. Just like my beliefs. So the channel is titled Question Authority. Let's read from Timothy Leary, who was one of the people in the 1960s that scared the shit out of the establishment. Because anytime people start to wake up, start to change their point of view, start to see things a little bit differently, start to question what they've been told their whole lives to be true, when that propaganda web that starts to break down, where they've spent so much time, so much money, and so much effort manufacturing consent for war, consent for this irresponsible body of government, this lazy body of government that just wants to hold on to and maintain their power and is not interested in doing hard work at all to try and actually help people. They, for the most part, they just want to keep their comfortable job. Just like the people, so we spent $300 billion a day in Afghanistan. And and this was reported, a lot of the people who joined the Afghanistan military were people who live in a poor country, a country where the average person probably doesn't have a whole lot of opportunity. Their career path is very limited. They have families to feed, just like anybody else, just like all human beings everywhere. We all have responsibilities. And they offered for these people to join the military and to make a living. So a lot of the people that were part of this military, for 20 years we stayed there, and we create an economy where they're able to make a living from joining this military, but they don't really believe in what we're saying. They don't really believe that we should be there occupying their country. There may be some that do, but a large majority of it, and this is proven true by how quickly and how easily the Taliban were able to just come in and take over control of the country again, it's because they're not going to go so far as to actually fight. Because our ideas and our ideals, especially this neoconservative ideal and this viewpoint, is profoundly American. It is profoundly an elitist American concept, a Judeo-Christian inspired concept. And it's foreign in that part of the world. They are in a foreign country. They have their own ways of looking at things. They have their own ideas on how they should organize their society. And they have a right to do so because we did not sign a formal declaration of war since the end of World War II. We don't have any business being in any of those fucking countries. So let's hear what Bill Kristol has to say. And I'm sorry that you have to look at the face of this frog-like character, this smug, satisfied smile. Although he looks like he's sitting on a rock or something like that. This slightly uncomfortable but smug, pampered ass of Bill Kristol. And let's hear the crap that comes out of his mouth.
I mean, obviously none of us knows, and we won't know. I mean, yeah, but I'm with you in the sense that if you the burden of proof is on the people who said it's unsustainable, right? I mean, it has been sustained a long time. We stopped combat operations, we the U.S. in 2014. You could make a sophisticated argument, and it may be right ultimately, that underneath, over the last 6-7 years, things have been hollowing out. The Taliban was making some progress. The Trump's agreement in February of 2020 had really gutted the Afghan regime and military problem.
You know, there's a real problem. A lot of these gummy actors, they saw Donald Trump come along, and let's face it, guys. The Republican agenda before Donald Trump was not anything that any real liberal or left person, socially left, people who believe in also socialist principles like sharing, like us all living here together as a community and helping each other. I completely lost my train of thought, but fuck it. Let's just go back to this piece of shit, because
in a way that you couldn't just underneath, over the last 6-7 years, things have been hollowing out. The Taliban was making some progress.
Oh, right. So these guys with this terrible agenda, and listen. So in the New American Century, you hear that word, throw it around a lot. New American Century, it was started in 1997. William Kristol, Robert Kagan, they created this organization that basically said, we are America. We should go and spread our ideas and ideals across the world into other countries. And of course, the whole declaration is kind of milquetoast and mild, but it is obvious in their declaration. Let's see, there's a couple of little tiny things right in the declaration that really, let's see, New American Century, Statement of Principles. So the New American Century Statement of Principles, let's take a look at it. And before I go completely off into another place, basically, we're allowing these people to rehabilitate themselves because of Donald Trump. So Donald Trump comes along. He's this bombastic person who doesn't have any kind of filter. He goes out and he says all of these crazy, terrible things. And people like him because they don't like the other side. So anybody's going to take a shot the other side. Anybody's going to poke at all of these new ideas that people find uncomfortable and unsettling, and they feel like the world is changing around them and they don't know what's going on. Their deep-seated racism is starting to be challenged, and they don't want to confront these things. They just want to enjoy this sort of white supremacist system that is set up in this country, and they don't want it to change. So for the myriad of reasons that people find Donald Trump taking licks at the other side satisfying and makes them want to support him, it's partly the same reason I like people like Jimmy Dore or Max Blumenthal. People, they're willing to go and take licks at the other side. They're willing to say something that I like to hear, because I put a lot of faith in Bernie Sanders. I put a lot of faith in AOC. I put a lot of faith in Cori Bush. I contributed money to Bernie Sanders' campaign. I never contributed money to any political campaign ever in my entire life, and I never thought I ever would. But I believed in these people. I thought they were going to do something to help not just me, but the rest of the people in this country, and try to change these systemic problems that are so obvious and so transparent, so terrible. But Donald Trump comes along, and Donald Trump aggravates the old guard of the Republican system. That doesn't mean that because Trump is bad, therefore the old Republican system is good. You know, before Donald Trump came along and ran for president back in 1997, they created this organization called the New American Century. So let's look at their statement of principles, and just one part in particular. So We need to increase defense spending significantly if we are to carry out our global responsibilities today and modernize our armed forces for the future. Our global responsibilities are not to start sending troops and tanks and bombs and weapons to other countries that we haven't declared war against. We need to strengthen our ties to democratic allies, challenge regimes hostile to our interests and our values. So it goes back to the values, the things that offend the sensibilities of these elite, comfortable characters. And there's poor Republicans too, but they're also entrenched in this ideology. We need to promote the cause of political and economic freedom abroad. I don't think sending troops into Afghanistan and killing people, sending troops into Iraq and killing, I believe it was millions of people that were actually killed in Iraq. How many civilians died to promote the cause of political and economic freedom abroad? And we need to accept responsibility for America's unique role in preserving and extending an international order friendly to our security, our prosperity, and our principles. So basically, what they are saying is that we need to use the military to go out and do regime change and change everybody that we feel could possibly be a threat to us, anyone that disagrees with our values. You make a lot of Hitler comparisons, and you hear it thrown around a lot, and it's not usually used appropriately. But didn't Hitler have this idea where he felt that his people were more superior to the rest of the world, and therefore he should send his military into their countries to change anyone who disagreed with his ideology? As an American, that disgusts me, that there could be people who think the priority of America in international matters is to challenge anyone with guns, with troops, with violence, who disagrees with our values and our principles. That's not our job. The American borders end where the American borders end. We should talk to other countries. And Obama, during the debate with who the hell was he even running against? George Bush. He debated George Bush. And I remember I was so excited for this guy, and I heard him debate George Bush, and he says, goes on this very eloquent answer to a question, a response to him. And he says that we should be using diplomacy on other countries. We should use war as a last resort. What happened when Obama got into the office? They started bombing other countries. And you can't lay all this at the feet of the president that's in charge, because there is a military industrial complex with people who they're there for their careers. They're not elected officials. Most of these people have been there for a long, long time, and they listen to idiots. Not idiots, but intentional, narcissistic people who want to use violence to justify their ideology and change regimes across the world with military intervention. And they think that's okay. They actually, in their hearts, they believe that they're doing something good. These people are twisted. But anyway, so don't let any Republican who says that he doesn't like Trump, which is the easy thing to say for a lot of them, don't let them then become a good person in your eyes. Bill Kristol is not a good person. His thoughts, his words, and his actions are responsible for the deaths of millions of people with no declaration of war. That is terrorism. We're just doing it to people in another part of the world that we can't see. We don't have to walk outside of our door and see the effects of a drone bomb that was dropped on a hospital and women and children dead, blown apart. We don't have to see it. We walk out and we walk onto our street and we don't see the effects. So it doesn't bother us. just like drone warfare can be like a video game. They're using a controller. They're looking at a screen. It's not connected to reality in the same way that two soldiers pointing guns at each other is connected to reality. We've allowed, and through technology, we've distanced ourselves from the humanity that should be present in what should be a last resort, and that is the games of war. Okay, Billy boy, what do you got to say?
The Trump's agreement in February of 2020 had really gutted the Afghan regime and military probably in a way that you couldn't just fix by a couple thousand troops. And that's all a legitimate argument, but they haven't really made that argument. And again, as I say, since the status quo was acceptable, it seems to me if you're going to change an acceptable status quo in a very difficult part of the world, the burden of proof is on you to make the argument. And so I think
the status quo was acceptable. The status quo being that we are occupying another country, accomplishing nothing, wasting millions and millions of dollars. And once we leave, no matter what, no matter when we leave, the Taliban is going to take back control because they are the most powerful force, military force in that country. And the people that are part of the army that we funded and we raised are not, they don't have the beliefs like somebody like Bill Kristol does. They don't have the beliefs of somebody that flips on TV and looks at a televangelist preacher and says, right on, man. Yeah, I'm going to send you my money. There are people who are so heavily propagandized. There's this whole idea of American exceptionalism and these flag waving people that feel like that gives them purpose inside of their lives. And you can't say this, not necessarily, you can't blame the people that are on the bottom, that are just really suffering under this ideology that's been imposed on them by their friends and their family and the people that they grew up around. I mean, it's just so complex. I feel like I'm speaking in generalities, and I'm starting to kind of stray into an area where I may say something that is not correct. And I should go try very, very hard to stay on topic. So we've got Bill Kristol, we've got his dad, the fathers of neoconservatism. Neoconservatism is basically an ideology and a movement that is to oppose pacifism. So their ideology is, we do not like peace. We need adversity to make us stronger. They had never faced adversity in their actual lives if they really believe that horse shit. Bill Kristol sounds a little bit tempered here. He sounds like he's trying to backpedal. He's trying to say something that doesn't sound quite as offensive because he knows the winds are changing. People don't really swallow that bullshit anymore. And he is trying to temper the things that he's saying. But let's take a look at the old Bill Kristol, and let's look at him on C-SPAN answering some questions. So, he says the Iraq war will last 2 months. That's a lie.
I just heard whatever else you could say about this war. Let me just make one point. George Bush is not fighting this like Vietnam. We don't need to refight the whole history of Vietnam.
Maybe that's the danger.
Here we go again. So just like what the fuck is this idiot's name? Matt Lewis. Just like Matt Lewis goes, oh no, we don't need to litigate the last 20 years. So Bill Kristol is saying, oh no, we don't really need to go back and talk about us illegally going and occupying a country and whether that was right or wrong. Blah 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 blah.
But it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. This is going to be a 2-month war, not a
Park Hill.
year war.
A 2-month war. Let's go back and let's listen to this fucking monster. And it's easy for him to be a monster because he doesn't have to actually get his hands dirty. It's easy for him to, through his actions and through his words, cause the deaths of millions of people because he never has to experience any of the reality of what that really is. He doesn't have to pull the trigger on a gun and see a person die in front of him. He doesn't even have to push the button on a drone and see a building explode and hundreds of people die. He doesn't have to see all the collateral damage. He doesn't have to see the bodies of men, women, and children, fathers, grandfathers, grandmothers, mothers, people who are caught up in this unnecessary execution of violence in another country because he just gets to sit comfortably and watch it all happen and pontificate about it. But he doesn't have to actually feel the pain that this causes. So he can remain smug and arrogant and be a monster and cause, whether intentionally or unintentionally, the deaths of innocent people and still feel good about himself at night.
Go ahead, not 6 months.
Hey, Brian, how's
Yes.
it going?
Good, sir. What would you like to say?
Going to
How
be
about
2
go ahead,
months, not
please?
6 months.
Not a
Park Hill.
It's
Oh,
going
how
to be
about
2
go ahead,
months, not
please?
6 months.
Hey,
going to happen.
From
This
Park-
is going to be a 2-month war, not a
Park
There we go.
Hill.
This is going to be a 2-month war. Let's take a look. How long was the war in Iraq? More than 7 years. It's a lot more than 2 months. He looks like he's gonna take a shit there. I wasn't sharing the screen. Here we go. There's Bill Kristol, constipated. They both look kind of constipated. I guess when you're so full of shit, quite often you look constipated. Makes a lot of sense. Okay. Bill Kristol called a liar. I watched this one a little
My
bit
husband's
earlier.
on his third tour to Iraq. And I just want to, if I could look Mr. Kristol and people like him from the American Enterprise Institute, these people that are still pushing the war. I sleep 2 hours a night. I'm sure when your head hits your pillow, you know, you have the luxury of dreaming about, you know, anything that your mom will allow you to dream about. I sleep with a phone under my pillow. My kids, if someone rings the doorbell, instead of doing what normal kids do, they freeze. And they're in elementary school. You all don't understand. We're military people, but we're people too. And the stress that we are under is tremendous. So I'll make a proposal before I have to leave the air. If this war is as important as you on the right and the hawks say it is, and if it is truly essential to our vital interest to do this, then institute the draft so we can have a break.
Look at his face when he's listening to the voice of a woman who is related to a soldier that's actually out there fighting this war that he advocates so strongly for. And she's saying that she can't sleep at night because I believe it's her husband, keeps getting redeployed. I should be paying a little bit more attention to the details, but he is just brushing it off because he has no connection to the reality of what he's doing. All he has are these big ideas in his head. All he has is a stubborn view of the world where we need war in order to grow as human beings. Is that what they're saying? I mean, it's so confusing. His father trained him to be just another version of himself. And both of them are advocates for death and suffering in the world.
break. We are at the breaking point. I just had to counsel a friend last night who has had a solid marriage for 14 years because their marriage is falling apart because they're dual military and they haven't lived under the same roof together in 5 years. We're people. We can't keep up this stress level. Our children can't keep up this stress level. The spouses left behind can't keep up this stress level. And all you all keep saying, you just called my husband and all his troops a liar when you said it's mostly the insurgents attacking us. Because when I do get the luxury of speaking to my husband, what I'm hearing is the Iraqis let us through the gate, the security forces will let us through the
living in the farm, and it is tough. Well, look, the Army, some of us would argue, well, first of all, I really respect, obviously, this.
Oh, yeah, well, look, this lady is crazy. You fucking piece of shit.
Service. Those who've been over there, I made dinner last night with close friends whose son just got back from Iraq, and it is tough duty, obviously, and now we're on second and third tours. Some of us argued for a long time before 9/11 and very vehemently after 9/11 that the Army and Marines were too small for the world we are living in, for the foreign policy obligations we are likely.
He wants more troops. He wants more money. $300 million a day spent in Afghanistan. That's because of him and people like him advocating for growing the military to fight against foes that can never be conquered. We will never make the rest of the world like us. And that's not a good thing to wish for. We're not supposed to be making the rest of the world like us. Why don't we take care of the people here in this fucking country and stop trying to police the world?
To have to impose on our military for the warfighting obligations we're going to have to impose on the all-volunteer military. And finally, we're increasing the size of the Army and the Marines, but we're paying a price for that in terms of longer tours and people going back a second and third times. And the strains on family life are obviously very real, and that obviously it's a tough job over there.
So, Bill Kristol, a bunch of other neoconservatives, neocons, warhawks, create the new American century. They released this statement of purpose. It ends in 2006, and then they create the Foreign Policy Initiative. And the Foreign Policy Initiative allies with Israel because we have one place over there in the Middle East that's like us. And unfortunately, they are like us because they are also big fans of war. They are also big fans of killing their neighbors. They are also big fans of trying to change people around them and other sovereign countries to conform to their point of view. How did a people that suffered a Holocaust turn around and become so racist themselves to people that are different from them when they had a man who, because they were different from him, wanted them all to be exterminated? That's a whole nother topic. It's Bill Kristol again. Let me make sure I got the, yeah. Why does he always look like he's about to take a shit?
You know, David knows a lot about this, and but again, if I'm sure David would be the first to say it.
Oh, that's right. The shit comes out of his mouth. There we go.
If he had been in this White House, he would have, tried to the best of his ability to get people to think things through, to make it the withdrawal sensible, get the civilians out before the military, reassure neighbors, and do some other things around the world that show that we're not going away.
So one last thing before I go, and Bill Kristol, I believe, is still part of the Center for American Freedom. The Foreign Policy Initiative allied with Israel. They're very hawkish on Iran. That, I believe, is their next target. And it's going to take all of us who are voicing our opinion that we don't want to be involved in all these foreign conflicts. It's going to take us to speak up. It's going to take us potentially to go out into the streets and march. It's going to take us to really start to understand these things and try to fight against them. Because for 20 years, I did not every day wake up and think we're spending $300 million in Afghanistan. So there's a huge system of propaganda, a huge system of control. And it's very hard to break through that. Even as a person who is not for all of these wars, I was not aware or conscious of the waste of both human and monetary. We can't do it again. We can't do it again. Why would we do this again? Why would we go after another country again? We need to get the people out. All of these foreign conflicts. We need people in government advocating for the reallocation of these funds to be placed where it can do the most good to help grow our society, to help solve the problems here at home. And there's a lot of them. There's enough adversity here at home. So I'll read that. Let me read that Shakespeare quote again. And you know what? If you're a rich neocon and you've got all the money in the world and all the comfort in the world, you feel like you don't have adversity, and you really need that to help you grow. So we've got William Shakespeare here, and Bill Kristol's dad was very fond of this old adage. And it's taking a little while to load. But if you're in that position and you feel like you need something to challenge you, why don't you go out and try to help somebody? I'm sure there's a soup kitchen in your neighborhood. Why don't you go serve there? Why don't you go serve the homeless food? Why don't you look up some groups that are providing homeless people with housing? Why don't you make some donations to them? Why don't you go to Homes for Humanity and why don't you help build some houses for poor people? Why don't you go to another country and help support a humanitarian effort, a real humanitarian effort, and stop thinking that the United States needs to be in a perpetual state of conflict with the rest of the world in order to grow from adversity. That's the most ridiculous reasoning that I've ever heard. It is very dangerous. I have a dentist appointment. I've got to fucking go.